Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Delivering Dunamis podcast, where we are inspiring transformation through the strength and the power of the Almighty. My name is Matthew Deibler, and I'm your host. Today, I'm going to step into quite a bit of vulnerability here, and I do that most episodes, but a lot of the stories that I've shared are things that I've, spoken about before, written about in my book. Today, you're going to get some new material. I've touched on it before. I've done a little bit of content around it, but there are likely going to be some things that are revealed in this episode that I've held very tight to my chest for most of my life. Things that I've really never spoken about to anyone. The reason that I want to step into this vulnerability and really be very open about this topic is because I believe this is a conversation that we need to have. Having encountered Satan multiple times directly in my life and understanding his influence and how he seeks to distract and divide us, I have a firm understanding of the areas where he really, gets involved and tries to steer us off course. So in my book, The Devil and the Children of God at the End of the World, I do my best to reveal the deceptive, intricate web of lies that he likes to invite into the lives of God's children so that you can prepare yourself for those attacks and, have the knowledge and strength to resist if or when he comes knocking. Topic today is debt. I've resisted going too deep into this conversation in the past, likely because I've felt so much shame about it. And as I've revealed to you before, shame, guilt, a couple of the two most powerful negative emotions that we can embody. Satan loves when we are overcome with those types of negative emotions because those emotions tend to hold us captive. They lead us into a position where we feel obligated to conceal. And in that obligation to conceal, we remain caught in this cycle of pain. We essentially continue to repeat the trauma. And that's devastating. And it really is a distraction. It interferes with God's purpose in our lives. So today, talking about debt, I wanted to give you a little bit of the backstory, where it all started in my life. In 2005, I graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I was in a relationship for a good part of my senior year, and we were, serious at the time. And so when we got ready for commencement and were beginning to plan for our adult lives, we decided that we wanted to, start those lives together. We were from different parts of the U.S., but we had a vision for where we wanted to be. And so we picked a new home outside of Chapel Hill and we went there and started our lives together. A few months into that time after college, I felt moved to propose. And so I did that. And at the time I was working my first real job. I didn't have the money in a savings account to, cover the cost of an engagement ring. And so I I used the one credit card that I had at the time, which was one that was established when I was in college, sort of for emergency purposes and expenses that like if I needed my parents to support me with something and they couldn't get me the cash immediately. It was kind of one of those things to cover any emergency expenses that came up. So I had this one credit card. I had started working, wasn't making nearly enough money to pay thousands of dollars for a ring. And so I took this card and I financed the ring. It's the biggest purchase I had ever made. And I knew that I would need to be disciplined in my efforts to pay off that balance. But patience was never something I was very good at, and the obsessive compulsive nature of my being at the time really would not allow the debt to just, sit and then diminish over time with a consistent payment plan. I was just fixated on it and I wanted it gone immediately. I couldn't handle it. It felt like a weight that it really just tormented me. And so I started seeking ways outside of my 9 to 5 employment to come up with some money to pay off this balance, or at least pay it off a little more quickly than I was anticipating I'd be able to. I started gambling, and I had gambled before, so I won't say that it was the first time that I ever placed a wager because, I bet on sports a little bit in college, and we're talking, $20 a game or something, not real like high stakes stuff. It's actually quite good at it, I thought. And that's part of the reason why I believed that I could turn to this fix to get rid of the debt. The issue was that, betting $20 a game, I really couldn't wrap my head around how long it would take for me to accumulate enough where I could put a dent into the debt because, it just wouldn't accumulate fast enough. The wins wouldn't accumulate fast enough that it would have any significant effect on that balance that I was carrying. So what I did was I made riskier moves as opposed to betting on the outcome of one game. I would do parlays. Parlay is when you take multiple events and you need all of them to hit. So rather than just needing one team to win, you now need 3 or you need 5. Payout is much greater if it hits, but your odds are much slimmer. So it doesn't go in your favor very often. Let's say that. Beyond that, I started recognizing that some of these sports books had online casinos. And so I would go into the casinos and, I'd take that $20 maybe that I was going to wager on a game and I would put it in the casino. Well, $20 in a casino evaporates in about 2 minutes. So you realize you need a bigger bank account when you start playing in that space. When the funds started to run low in my checking account, then what I began to do was I recognized that you could actually use a credit card. And so I started using that credit card to get more chips in the casino, or refund my sportsbook account. And what happened was, very quickly, the debt pile, that load, continued to grow. I mean, and the growth of it accelerated at a rapid pace because, if I put $100 on a credit card transaction to fund a gaming account, and then I lost that $100, I would feel the guilt and the shame for doing that. And my response was, you've got to get out of the hole. Like, I started to look at it as though I had absolutely no choice in the matter. I've got to get that money back. So I have to put another $100 in, or another $100 in. It just, and there was really no limit to it. I stopped when I ran out of credit. So this habit turns into really an addiction. My OCD triggered the negative feelings that just kept pounding at my brain, urging me to create some kind of a fix. And then that leads to gambling, and the gambling then becomes habitual, and it becomes an addiction. And it actually gets to the point where there are times that I do win and I have enough in the account to dig myself completely out of the hole, and I can't get the money out fast enough. I can't stop myself. I'm always thinking about more, the next bet. And so I went through several devastating times in my life where I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and then I just gave it all away. This went on for about 6 years, 2005 up until that moment when God intervened in 2011. And it was when God came into my life and he spoke. It was in the midst of one of these very ugly moments of action that I was taking while I was gambling. So he wanted to break me free from that stronghold. He recognized that with that in place, I'd never have the clarity to get well. It was a mechanism that the devil was using to distract me, to trap me in shame and guilt, to trigger my OCD, my anxiety, to diminish me, to conceal God's purpose, to lead me into a state of hopelessness, a state of depression. It robbed me of any positive focus that I could have in my life. It totally consumed me through many seasons. I'll never forget how awful some of those nights were. And again, the most painful were the nights where I would actually have some luck. and I'd be working my way out. And that was always my goal, is like, once I get out of here, I'm done with it. Because it got to the point where it wasn't like I liked to gamble, I just felt obligated to. But those nights where I had accumulated enough in my account to right the ship, and then my addiction took over and I lost it all. Those nights were hard to come back from, because the hole was very deep. Let me be honest with you. It was ugly, because after I exhausted my credit limit in one card, I started applying for others. And then I had countless cards on file that I could draw from to, run up the credit limit. And I did that many times. The ugliness of my addiction was something I really did my best to hide. And today I'm just going to be very open about it. I'll tell you, one of the things that I used to do when I had used all of my traditional credits, so your traditional Visa card credit, I had a few store cards. Home Depot was one of them. And Home Depot, when I purchased my house and my income level, went up, they extended me a pretty solid credit line. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was less than $10,000, but it might have been, somewhere between $7,000 and $9,000. Well, you can't draw cash from a Home Depot card, but I had a workaround. What I would do is I would go to a Home Depot store, or I would order one online. I would go and I would order a gift card, and I'd get it in a big sum. So I'd get like a $200 gift card, or a $300 gift card, or a $500 gift card. And I would finance it on the Home Depot store card. And then I'd go back home. I'd create an ad on Craigslist, and I would sell a $500 Home Depot card, for example, for like $350 cash. It's a great deal for the guy that was buying it from me. And I'd drive, wherever I needed to go, often out to a Home Depot store where someone was looking to, take the card and make a significant purchase with it. Maybe they needed a new appliance or whatever. I would go and meet the individuals outside of that store, and they'd pay me cash, and I'd go home and drop it in the ATM first. And then I'd go home and fund my account and keep going, keep gambling. I remember at one point, Home Depot seemed to catch on to what I was doing, and they reduced my credit limit considerably. I think I went from, like $7,000 or $9,000 down to like 2,000 or 1,500, something like that. And so that really exhausted any available credit that I had. And, my options grew slimmer and slimmer. When I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, and I owned my first home up there. I purchased that home, or had the ability to purchase that home, largely as a result of some money that I was gifted by my grandfather at the time of his passing. It was essentially down payment money for the house, and it was truly a blessing. And it hurts me to tell this story. I used that money, bought the house, and then years later, when my other credit options were exhausted, I took the equity out of my home. And I used it to pay off gambling debt and fund more gambling. It was such a distraction. I would sit and just stare at this spreadsheet that I had created where, I tracked every penny. Try to find like the most creative ways to exist, to pay my bills. And it's amazing, through all of this, I never missed a single payment. I was never late on a single payment for any card or any utility or mortgage, any expense that I had, because I was so diligent about tracking each and every penny and finding creative ways to come up with money so that I could take care of those needs. But it was so stressful. There was so much pressure in that environment. And I just believe that the devil loved it because I was so captive. It took every ounce of my time, energy, and focus. And it created barriers between me and other people that I was close to because I was working so hard to conceal it. I didn't want them to find out. And I would get angry if they did question things. That engagement that led to the initial debt that I took on, that ended. And I'm sure that my habit was an influence. We were not meant to be together. And in the end, I'm thankful that God's will prevailed. And boy, I've just been blessed with an amazing wife and beautiful children. So the story all turned out as he intended it to. But that was a painful event in my life at the time. That breakup. And I'm sure that I was responsible for a good part of the challenges that we faced in our relationship. That's just me being honest. I remember one night I was traveling for work. I was in Washington, D.C., and I brought my personal laptop with me because I knew I'd be in the hotel that night and wouldn't have much to do, and I'd want to gamble. And so, sitting in the hotel, I started, and I remember it was 2008 because the World Series was going on, and the Phillies, my team, they were in it. And I had the game on in the background, and I was sitting there playing in an online casino in the hotel room. I started having some success, with smaller wagers, playing blackjack, like $5 or $10 a hand, and increased it up to like 25 as I got into, a few $100s or whatever it may be. And then it just kind of took off. I was on like a hot streak. And so I just kept pushing it. I started betting probably 250, 500 a hand. By late that night, I had $42,000 in my gaming account. And at the time, that would have taken care of the vast majority of the debt that I had accumulated as a result of my awful habit. So I remember feeling such elation. It was as though the handcuffs were going to be taken off, and I was going to have the opportunity to finally pay this off and start fresh in a new life. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. I kept going. I got greedy. I started thinking about what I could do if you overcome the debt hole, and then you can put another $40,000 in your account that is to the positive, and, whatever. I started getting caught up in these like temptations to win more. And I got so aggressive with the wagers that I lost it all, and I did it pretty quickly. I remember that this online casino had sort of a rewards program. So, they would track your activity, and they would give you sort of like cash back for the amount of bets that you placed. And normally we're not talking like a significant amount of money. We're talking, if you're having your traditional night in the casino, they give you maybe $10 back or whatever. Well, because of the amount of money and the amount of wagers that I placed that night, I got like $1,800 or $2,000 in like free money back. And I'm going to tell you something that's probably not going to shock you. I lost all of that too. Because, of course, after I had lost the $42,000 hit that was going to get me out of the hole, when I got $2,000 back, my goal was to get back to 42,000. Not to, okay, that was painful. Let's keep this $2,000. Or if you're going to wager, have a realistic goal in mind. No, it's completely unrealistic. And I felt obligated to get back the money that I had lost. Obsessed over it. So, I had a meeting the next day, and went fairly well. I don't know how I was able to regain my focus to present. My mind was so distracted. But I somehow created a bit of clarity for that hour or so. And then I got in the car, and I was driving back home. At the time, I was living in Pennsylvania. I had about a 2.5 hour drive to sit and really absorb what had just happened. And it made me so ill. I mean, these are the types of events that you can see. You can understand how someone in an addiction would feel led to just horrible depression, hopelessness, and perhaps feeling like there's just no way out. You could see why the suicidal thoughts could start presenting themselves. Because, gosh, when you're in that pit, you just really, it's as though, someone could hand you everything that you've ever desired, and you would still find a way to lose it all. I believe that when we assume debt, the devil really assumes power. Now, a lot of people would argue that there is healthy debt. There's debt that we sort of need to take on, in a sense, in order to, create a life for our families. I mean, if you think about purchasing a home and a 30-year mortgage, that's a huge commitment. Most people don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars just laying around to buy a home cash. There's very few individuals in this world that are that fortunate financially. And so, in a sense, it's almost necessary, if you're going to be a homeowner, to assume some debt. And maybe that's not something that affects most people. And that wasn't one that really affected me much, as far as like, oh, I got to get the house paid off. I really never felt pressure from that. But the credit card debt was something I couldn't handle. I knew how the interest was charged, and I knew that by making just a monthly payment, my hole was just getting deeper, even if I didn't have any additional transactions. And there was just a lot of negative energy around carrying that. I felt like I had to do something. I felt obligated to gamble. The devil had me in such a state of deception. He had chaos running through my mind. He had me locked into a state of confusion. I was distracted. At that point in my life, I knew nothing about God. I had no relationship with him. And honestly, I was in trouble. So my encouragement, my words of wisdom for you today would be to be careful about assuming debt. As you assume debt, the devil, in many cases, assumes power. Debt can rob us of a lot of focus. It can take many years away from us, away from our purpose. You are called to live in freedom, the freedom of Christ. And if you're attaching yourself to the debt of the world, you're really sort of tying yourself to Satan's kingdom. Trust me on this because I've lived it. I understand the torment of carrying that burden. At the peak of it all, I probably had about $100,000 in unsecured debt. You can't walk around with $100,000 in unsecured debt and not be influenced by it. You can't exist in the relationships that you have with family and friends and not think that you're being influenced by it. Those relationships are being influenced by it. You can't go to work carrying that on your shoulders and not think that it's affecting your performance and your relationship with your colleagues. It really seeps its way into every aspect of your life. And it divides. It creates so much tension and it divides people. And that leads to just further emotional torment. When your debt starts ruining relationships, when your distracted mind starts leading to job related issues, you can start to see the impact. And that impact just it magnifies. Now it's not just about the debt. Now it's about, bridges you burned in your romantic relationships or in your work life. It takes over everything. And that's really Satan's intention. He wants to distract and divide us. He wants to create that chaos. He wants to lead us down a path that is destined for captivity and a path that leads us into such powerful emotions, negative emotions of shame and guilt, unworthiness, so that we actually contemplate taking our lives. Because ultimately, in the end, if that's where he leads us, then that's how he wins. That essentially seals a victory for him, because God's purpose then can never be lived out through us. I mean, we cannot fulfill the role that Christ has led us to or has designed for our lives if we are in such a state of depression that we contemplate taking our own lives. I want you to be aware of the power of this, and I want you to resist the temptation to align yourself with things in this world that require you to assume a heavy debt load. It's a trap. Once you get in too deep, it gets hard, very hard to dig your way out of it. Thanks be to God, he stepped in and he made it clear that I had a habit that was ugly that I needed to get rid of. And I did. But even after that, I'll be honest with you, it didn't go away without a fight, because I continued to make excuses to enable that temptation when, okay, I got rid of gambling, but then I started doing things in the stock market that were very risky. So that took another several years to get rid of. And that led to some more debt. It just, it's ugly, guys. And I don't want to see you get caught up in it. thankfully, I'm in a much better place today. And I have no temptation or urge to go back to that ugly way of living. God has truly set me free. And I worry very, very little about money anymore. I just trust that He will provide. And He does. Each and every day, 24 hours at a time, God provides, so long as I step forward boldly in His will. I want you to be able to live that freedom as well. Don't get caught up in this debt cycle. It's ugly. And it is a distraction from your true life's calling. I love you all. God bless.